I always loved hiking alone. The silence, the rhythm of my boots against the dirt, the way the trees seemed to breathe with me. It was peaceful. I never thought much about danger. Sure, I carried a knife, kept a first aid kit in my pack, and always told someone my route. But in the end, I was just a guy walking in the woods. What was there to be afraid of? That mindset changed last September when I decided to hike the remote Granite Ridge Trail. It was a lesser-known route in the Pacific Northwest, winding through dense forest and steep rock faces. I'd found it online, buried in an old hiking forum. A few people had mentioned the trail being tough, poorly marked, and rarely maintained. That only made it more appealing. I like solitude and I liked a challenge. I arrived at the trailhead late morning, parked my truck on the gravel shoulder, and checked my gear. Boots tight, water bottles full, GPS on. The first few miles were just as expected: thick trees, uneven dirt paths, and the distant sound of a river somewhere below. The trail wasn't well traveled. Ferns grew high, and fallen branches littered the way, but that only made it feel more untouched, more wild. About 6 miles in, I found the first odd thing. It was just off the trail, half hidden under a fallen log. A boot. An old, sun-bleached hiking boot. Its laces missing, the toe split open. It wasn't too unusual, people lost gear all the time. But something about it made me pause. It wasn't just old. It looked abandoned, like someone had taken it off and left it there. I moved on. The air grew cooler as I gained elevation, and the forest changed. The trees were taller, the undergrowth sparser. It should have made the trail easier to follow, but instead it became harder. The markers, small red triangles nailed to trees, were fewer and farther apart. At one point, I stopped seeing them entirely. I pulled out my GPS, but the dense trees made the signal weak. I checked my paper map, traced my finger along the ridgeline, and decided to keep going. A mile later, I smelled it. At first, I thought it was just damp earth, the usual forest smell. But it got stronger, an awful, thick scent, like something rotting. It was sharp, clinging to the back of my throat. I slowed my steps, scanning the woods. I expected to see a dead deer, maybe a bear's leftovers. Instead, I saw a backpack. It was sitting upright against a tree, as if someone had set it down just for a moment. A blue and gray hiking pack, covered in dirt and leaves. I took a few steps closer, my stomach tightening. The zippers were open. A torn sleeping bag hung out, its fabric ripped in long, jagged lines. A jacket lay half-buried nearby, shredded like something had clawed through it. I felt a cold sweat break out along my back. I called out, just a simple hello, but the forest absorbed my voice. Nothing moved. The smell was worse here, stronger. I didn't want to see what was causing it. My brain told me to leave, to turn around, but my legs moved forward instead. The ground near the pack was disturbed, the dirt uneven. I looked closer and saw what I first thought were deep boot prints, but they weren't quite right. They were too wide, the edges too irregular. My mind struggled to place them, but then I saw something that made me go cold. A fingernail. It was just lying there in the dirt, a small curved sliver, torn, jagged, human. That was when I finally listened to my instincts. I turned back the way I came, walking fast, almost jogging. I kept my head down, forcing myself not to look back. Every rustle in the trees felt too loud, every shift in the wind too sudden. My hands were clammy around the straps of my pack. I tried to remember the way I had come, tried to spot familiar landmarks, but everything looked different now, twisted and wrong. Then I realized something worse. The boot, the one I had seen earlier, it wasn't there anymore. I felt panic rise in my throat. My legs burned from the fast pace, but I didn't slow down. I needed to get back to my truck. I needed to get out. Somewhere behind me, in the trees, a branch snapped. Not the soft, natural sound of a branch falling on its own. This was sharp, intentional. I ran. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just ran, crashing through bushes, scraping my arms on branches. My breath was ragged, my chest tight. I didn't stop until I saw the glint of my truck's windshield through the trees. I practically threw myself at the door, fumbling with the keys, slamming it shut behind me. For a long time, I just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the trailhead. The forest was quiet, still, like nothing had happened. I drove straight to the nearest ranger station, told them everything: the boot, the smell, the backpack. The ranger listened carefully, nodding, taking notes. When I finished, he sighed. "You're not the first," he said. My stomach turned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. Then he said, "People go missing out there, more than they should. We've searched, but we never find much. Just things, like what you saw." I left after that. I never went back to Granite Ridge. I still hike, but not alone. Never alone. And sometimes on the quieter trails, when the trees close in around me, I swear I hear footsteps that aren't mine. The thought kept circling in my head as I trudged up the narrow mountain trail, my boots crunching against loose gravel and dry leaves. The late afternoon sun was slipping behind the jagged peaks in the distance, casting long shadows through the trees. It wasn't my first time hiking alone, but something about today felt different, off in a way I couldn't explain. It had started as a routine trip. I had planned for a weekend hike through a remote section of the national forest, a place I'd been meaning to explore for years. The route wasn't well-traveled, which was part of the appeal. Just me, the wilderness, and the quiet. I packed my gear meticulously. A tent, food, extra water, a first aid kit, a map, and a compass. I had checked the weather forecast multiple times. No storms, no extreme heat, just a perfect few days in the backcountry. The first few hours had gone smoothly. I followed the map carefully, making mental notes of landmarks: twisted old trees, a massive boulder that split in two, a narrow creek that cut across the trail. I was miles away from the nearest road when I found a small clearing just off the path, a decent spot to set up camp. It was still a couple of hours before sunset, so I figured I'd keep moving, maybe make it to the ridge before stopping for the night. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't mine. I stopped, staring at the imprints in the dirt. They were fresh, too fresh. A single set of boot prints, slightly larger than mine, running parallel to the trail. I hadn't seen another hiker all day. I hadn't heard anyone, but someone had passed through here recently, maybe within the last hour. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. People hike out here even on the lesser-used trails. Maybe they were ahead of me, just out of sight. But something about them made me uneasy. The prints weren't in a straight line. They weaved, stepping off the path and back on again, as if whoever made them had been wandering or watching something. I shook off the thought and kept moving. As I climbed higher, the trees thinned out and the wind picked up. The ridge was close now, and I wanted to get a good look at the valley before nightfall. The last stretch of the trail was steep, forcing me to slow down, my legs burning with each step. Finally, I reached the top. The view was stunning. Rolling hills stretched out below, covered in dense pine forests. In the far distance, I could see the glimmer of a lake, the sun reflecting off its surface. I dropped my pack and took a deep breath, enjoying the stillness. The air was crisp, cool, perfect. Then I saw it. Down in the valley, near the tree line, something moved. At first, I thought it was a deer, but as I squinted against the fading light, I realized it was a person. A lone figure standing completely still, facing my direction. A chill ran through me. It was too far to make out any details, but I could tell they weren't wearing bright hiking gear. No backpack, no trekking poles. Just standing there, unmoving, watching. I felt exposed on the ridge like a target. I tried to shake the feeling, convincing myself it was just another hiker. But why were they just standing there? Why not move? I grabbed my pack and started down the other side of the ridge, picking up my pace. I needed to find a place to set up camp before dark. The further I got from that ridge, the better. I reached a small grove of trees and set up quickly, pitching my tent, unpacking my food, and getting a small fire going. The normal routine helped calm my nerves. I ate in silence, listening to the crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept glancing over my shoulder, scanning the dark woods beyond my fire's glow. I told myself it was paranoia, the lingering unease from the footprints and the figure in the valley. I double-checked my gear, making sure my knife was within reach inside my tent. Then I crawled inside, zipped the door shut, and tried to sleep. Hours passed. I drifted in and out, waking at every little sound. The wind, the creaking branches, the distant hoot of an owl. Then, a snap. Close. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't the sound of a branch falling or an animal scurrying through the underbrush. It was deliberate. A footstep. I stayed completely still, listening. The fire had burned low outside, casting faint, flickering light against the fabric of my tent. Another step. Closer this time. My heart pounded. I reached for my knife, gripping it so tightly my fingers ached. I wanted to call out, "Who's there?" But fear kept me silent. Another step, and then nothing. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I strained my ears, trying to pick up any sound. My own breathing was too loud. I forced myself to stay still, to wait. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Then, just as I started to think it was my imagination, a hand pressed against the side of my tent. I stopped breathing. The pressure was light, testing. A slow drag of fingers down the nylon fabric. I gripped my knife harder, my mind racing. Fight or run? Stay quiet or make a move? Then, as suddenly as it came, the hand was gone. The silence returned. I waited, barely daring to move. 10 minutes. 20. The fire outside had died completely now, leaving me in total darkness. I needed to see. I needed to know if whoever or whatever had been there was gone. Slowly, I reached for my flashlight, clicking it on. A weak beam of light filled the tent. I turned toward the spot where the hand had been, expecting to see nothing. But there was something. A smear. A streak of dirt, maybe sweat, from where the fingers had touched the fabric. Proof that it wasn't my imagination. I knew then I couldn't stay. I had to move. Now, I packed in a frenzy, stuffing everything into my pack as quickly and quietly as possible. I didn't care about neatness. I just needed to go. My fingers fumbled with the tent zipper, each second stretching unbearably long. Finally, I got it open and stepped into the night. The forest was silent, too silent. I swung my flashlight around, scanning the trees. Nothing, no movement, no sound, just the dark, endless woods. My pulse hammered in my ears as I took a step forward, then another. I forced myself not to run, knowing that panic would only make me careless. I moved fast, heading back toward the ridge, then down toward the valley. My goal was to reach a main trail, something wider and more traveled, where I'd feel safer. My legs burned as I hiked, the weight of my pack pulling at my shoulders. Hours passed. I didn't stop. The first hint of dawn touched the sky when I finally saw it. The dirt road where my car was parked. Relief hit me like a wave, but I didn't slow down until I reached the driver's side door. Yanking it open and throwing my pack inside, I locked the doors, started the engine. My hands were shaking as I pulled onto the road, watching the forest shrink in my rearview mirror. I never looked back. I don't know who was out there that night. I don't know what they wanted, but I do know one thing. I'll never hike alone again. I always loved hiking alone. It was a way to clear my mind, to be away from everything. No cars, no people, just the sound of the wind in the trees and my own footsteps on the dirt. I had done plenty of solo hikes before, so when I decided to try a lesser-known trail deep in the mountains, I wasn't worried. The trail didn't have a name, just a number on a map. It was marked as lightly trafficked, which I took to mean peaceful. I parked my car at the small dirt lot near the entrance, packed my bag, and set off. The first few miles were beautiful. Dense pine trees, the smell of fresh earth, a steady incline that made my legs burn just enough to feel good. About an hour in, I noticed something strange. The path wasn't as well maintained as I expected. The dirt was packed down, but it was narrow, almost as if people hadn't used it much. That didn't bother me at first. Some trails are just like that. But then I saw the footprints. They were old, barely visible in the dry dirt, but they were there. What struck me as odd was that they weren't going in both directions, only one way, deeper into the trail. I stopped, looked around. No sounds of people, no fresh footprints coming back. It was weird, but not alarming. I kept walking. The forest started to change after a while. The trees were closer together, the path more uneven. I had to step over fallen branches and rocks more often. At one point, I had to duck under a massive tree that had fallen across the trail. That's when I noticed something else. Silence. Not just quiet silence. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves. Just my own breathing. I shook it off and kept going. Sometimes animals just go quiet when they sense a predator nearby. Maybe there was a bear somewhere or a mountain lion. I had bear spray in my bag, so I wasn't too worried. Still, something about the silence felt off. After another mile, I saw something up ahead. An old wooden structure. At first, I thought it was a cabin, but as I got closer, I saw it was just a single wall standing in the middle of the forest. The wood was gray, splintered, falling apart. It looked like it had been part of a building a long time ago. There was no roof, no other walls, just this one standing alone. Faint carvings covered the surface, deep grooves that looked almost like tally marks. I ran my fingers over them, feeling the rough texture. It was unsettling. I looked around. No signs of ruins, no foundations, nothing to suggest that a house had ever been here. Just this single wall. That's when I noticed the footprints again. Fresh this time, not mine. They were next to the structure, leading into the trees. But there was no other trail, just thick forest. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I told myself it was probably just another hiker who wandered off trail. People do that all the time. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. I turned back to the trail and walked faster. The sun was starting to lower, and the trees made it darker than it should have been. I decided I'd go another half mile, then turn around. That's when I saw the second structure. This one was worse. It was another wooden wall, but this time, there was something attached to it. An old, rotting backpack hanging from a nail. I felt my stomach drop. The pack was faded, torn, covered in dirt. It had been there for a long time. I stared at it for a while, trying to decide if I should check inside. I reached for it. A sound stopped me. A crunch in the woods behind me. Not an animal. Something heavy. I turned slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. Nothing, just trees and shadows. I swallowed hard, my fingers gripping the straps of my own backpack. I needed to leave. Now, I started back the way I came, walking fast, my ears straining for any sound. Every few steps, I glanced behind me. Nothing. But the feeling wouldn't go away, that feeling of being watched. Then the footprints, the ones I had seen going in, there were new ones, following mine. I broke into a run. Branches slapped my arms and face as I barreled down the trail. My breathing was loud, too loud. My boots pounded the dirt, but underneath that sound, I swore I could hear something else. Footsteps, matching mine. I didn't stop, didn't look back, just ran. When I finally saw my car through the trees, I nearly cried. I sprinted the last stretch, ripped open the door, and threw myself inside, locking it immediately. I sat there, panting, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. For a long time, I just stared at the trailhead. Nothing moved, no sounds, just that eerie, empty silence. I started the car and peeled out of there, dirt kicking up behind my tires. I never went back to that trail. I don't know who or what was out there. I don't want to know. I had been hiking alone for years, ever since I moved to the mountains. It was something I did to clear my head, to get away from people and the noise of everyday life. Most of the time, it was peaceful. Just me, the trees, and the sound of my boots crunching against dirt and gravel. But this hike was different. It was supposed to be a simple overnight trip. I had done the trail before, a long loop that went deep into the forest and up through some high ridges before circling back. It was about 25 miles total. I planned to hike about 15 miles the first day, camp for the night, and hike the rest back the next morning. I packed light: my tent, a sleeping bag, food, a water filter, and my knife. No need for a gun. Never saw a bear on this trail, and mountain lions stayed away if you made noise. Just in case, I had bear spray strapped to my belt. It was late summer, and the weather was perfect. The sun was warm, but not hot. A light breeze rustled through the trees. Everything seemed fine. I started in the late morning, keeping a steady pace, enjoying the quiet. The first few miles were easy, mostly flat with some gentle inclines. Around mile 6, the trail started getting steeper, winding up into the higher elevations. By noon, I had stopped for a quick lunch, jerky, nuts, and some dried fruit before pushing on. That's when things started feeling off. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just a feeling. The woods were too quiet. Normally, I'd hear birds or squirrels rustling through the undergrowth, maybe the distant sound of a woodpecker, but now nothing, just my footsteps and the wind. I brushed it off and kept going. Sometimes the forest got like this. Maybe a predator was nearby. That was normal. Still, I found myself checking over my shoulder more than usual. At mile 10, I noticed something strange. The trail had changed. I had hiked this loop before, many times. I knew the turns, the landmarks, the way the dirt packed down where other hikers had walked. But this part felt wrong. The trees were too close together. The undergrowth was thicker. The ground looked untouched, like no one had been through in a long time. I pulled out my map. According to it, I was still on the trail. Maybe the Park Service had rerouted it, though I hadn't heard anything about that. I kept moving. After another mile, I found something that made me stop cold. A backpack. It was old, weather-beaten, torn open like an animal had gotten to it. Clothes were scattered nearby, half buried under leaves. A sleeping bag, shredded. A boot, missing its laces. It had been here for a while. Months, at least. I bent down, looking closer. There was something else. A knife, its blade snapped in half. The handle was covered in something dark, something that had dried long ago. Blood. A cold feeling settled into my gut. I straightened up, looking around. The forest was still silent. Too silent. My own breathing was loud in my ears. I should have turned back. I should have gone back right then. But I was stupid. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone had an accident. Maybe they got lost and the search and rescue team just never found their gear. I kept going. The trail climbed higher, the trees thinning out as I reached the ridge. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky. I needed to find a place to camp soon. Normally, I'd look for a flat clearing, somewhere with a good view of the valley below. But as I scanned the area, something else caught my eye. Footprints. Fresh ones. Not boots. Bare feet. Human feet. The prints were deep, pressed hard into the dirt. Whoever left them had been moving fast. I swallowed, my mouth dry. I wasn't alone. A crack echoed through the trees. A branch snapping. Close. I turned, heart hammering. Nothing. Just trees and shadows stretching long in the evening light. I forced myself to breathe. I needed to stay calm. It was probably nothing. Maybe another hiker. Maybe someone living off the grid. Weird, but not impossible. I found a spot to set up camp, but I didn't light a fire. Instead, I ate in the dark, listening. The woods were still quiet. Too quiet. Then, in the distance, something moved. Not an animal. Not the wind. Something else. A slow, deliberate step. Then another. Closer. I gripped my knife, my breath shallow. My bear spray was in my hand, my thumb on the trigger. Then, nothing. The steps stopped. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my tent, gripping my knife, every nerve in my body screaming. The first light, I packed up fast. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I just started walking. Fast. Not running, but close. The footprints were still there. More of them. More than one set. I moved faster. My muscles burned. But I didn't stop. I wasn't safe. By midday, I recognized the final stretch of the trail. I was close, a mile out, maybe less. I pushed forward, then I smelled it, rot, like something dead. I forced myself to look. A deer, or what was left of it. Torn open, ribs gleaming white. But it wasn't eaten. Not really. The cuts were wrong. Precise. Like a knife had done it. I ran. I didn't stop until I saw my truck. I threw my pack in, locked the doors, and sped out of there so fast my tires kicked up gravel. I never hiked that trail again. I never reported what I saw. Maybe I should have. But even now, years later, I don't want to know. I don't want to know who or what was out there with me that night. I had always enjoyed hiking alone. There was something about the quiet of the wilderness, the crunch of dirt beneath my boots, and the rhythmic sound of my own breathing that made me feel alive. It was an escape from the city, from the endless buzz of people and obligations. It was just me and the mountains. That was all I needed. This particular trip had been planned for weeks. The trail I had picked was deep in the national forest, a lesser-known path that wound its way up a ridge before dropping into a narrow valley. It was supposed to be about 15 miles in total, an overnight trip at most. I packed my gear carefully: tent, sleeping bag, food, extra layers. I always made sure I was prepared. That's what made solo hiking possible. Being smart, being cautious. The first few miles were uneventful. The trail was overgrown in some places, but nothing I couldn't handle. I liked trails like this, the kind that didn't see too many people. The sun was high, the air was crisp, and for the first few hours I felt completely at ease. Then I noticed the first sign that something was off. It was subtle at first, just a feeling. The forest felt too quiet. The usual sounds of birds, insects, even the rustling of small animals in the underbrush were absent. I stopped walking, listening carefully. Nothing, just the wind through the trees. I shook it off. Sometimes forests got quiet. Maybe a predator was nearby, a bobcat or a coyote. I kept moving. As the afternoon stretched on, the uneasiness in my chest grew. The trail was harder to follow than I had expected. The markers, small blazes on trees, were spaced too far apart, and at one point, I lost them entirely. I backtracked, scanning the trees for any sign of the trail. That's when I saw it. A boot print. It was fresh, pressed deep into the mud near the base of a tree. It wasn't mine. The tread was different. I knelt down, studying it. Someone had passed through here recently. That wasn't too strange. Other people hiked these trails, even if they were less traveled. But something about it unsettled me. It was the only print I could see. No others leading up to it, none leading away. I straightened up, scanning the woods around me. Nothing. The sun was dipping lower now. I needed to find a place to set up camp soon. I forced myself to ignore the feeling gnawing at my stomach and pressed forward. The trail eventually led me to a small clearing beside a creek. It was a good spot, flat ground, water nearby. I set up my tent, ate a quick meal, and sat by the fire as night fell. That's when I heard the first noise. It was faint, distant, a snap like a twig breaking underfoot. I froze, listening. Came again, this time closer. I turned my head slowly, scanning the tree line. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows, making everything feel distorted. My breath was steady, controlled. Probably just an animal, I told myself. But that feeling, that deep, gut-level unease didn't go away. The sound stopped. For the next hour, I sat there, every muscle in my body tense, waiting. But nothing else happened. Eventually, I forced myself into my tent, zipping it up tight. I kept my knife close, just in case. Sleep didn't come easily. Every sound outside made me flinch. The wind, the creak of tree branches, the distant hoot of an owl. At some point, exhaustion won, and I drifted off. Then I woke up. Something was outside my tent. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just listened. A soft rustling sound, slow and deliberate. Footsteps, not an animal. Too heavy, too purposeful. My heart pounded in my chest. I reached slowly for my knife, gripping the handle tight. The footsteps stopped right outside. A shadow shifted against the fabric of the tent. I could see it in the faint moonlight. Someone was standing there. I swallowed hard, every nerve in my body screaming at me to do something. But what? If I moved, if I made a sound, would that set them off? I waited. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Finally, the shadow shifted again. The footsteps moved away, slow, unhurried, like whoever it was knew I was awake, knew I was listening. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At the first light of dawn, I tore out of that tent, packing my gear as fast as I could. My hands were shaking. I kept looking around, scanning the trees. Whoever had been out there, they were gone. But that didn't mean they wouldn't come back. I took off down the trail, moving fast. Too fast. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, my knee slamming into the dirt. Pain shot through my leg, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. I pushed myself up and kept moving. The trail was harder to follow in the morning light. I felt like I was seeing things, like every tree looked the same, every turn a repeat of the last. Had I already passed this way? Was I going in circles? I tried to steady my breathing, forcing myself to focus. I pulled out my map, my compass. I should have been nearing the trailhead by now, but nothing looked right. The trees pressed in around me, dense and suffocating. Then I saw something that stopped me cold. Another boot print, right in the middle of the trail. Fresh, too fresh. I looked up, scanning the trees. I saw nothing, no movement, no sound. But I knew I wasn't alone. I took off running. Branches whipped against my arms, my pack thudding against my back. I didn't care. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs screamed for me to stop. Then, suddenly, I burst onto a gravel road. My car was there, right where I had left it. I didn't look back. I threw my gear into the back seat, jumped in, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life and I peeled out of there, my tires kicking up dirt and gravel. I drove without stopping, not even looking in the rearview mirror until I was miles away. Only then did I let myself breathe. I still don't know who was out there. I don't know if they were following me the whole time, or if I had just wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. But I do know one thing. I won't ever go back to that trail again. I had been planning this hike for months, a solo, week-long trek through one of the most remote trails in the state. The kind of place where you don't run into another person for days, where the only sounds you hear are the wind in the trees and the distant cries of birds. It was exactly what I needed. A break from the noise of life, the stress of work, the endless demands of society. Just me, my gear, and the wilderness. The first few days were uneventful. Long hours of walking, my boots crunching against the dirt and fallen leaves. The trail was well marked but rarely traveled. I passed by clear mountain streams, towering pines, and wide meadows that felt untouched by time. The air was crisp, the kind that fills your lungs in a way that almost makes you forget about the aches in your legs. I had mapped out my camping spots in advance, ensuring I would always be near a water source and a suitable clearing to set up my tent. The third night was when things started to feel off. I had set up camp in a small valley, shielded from the wind by a dense wall of trees. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I got the feeling that something was watching me. At first, I chalked it up to my imagination. Being alone in the woods can do that to you. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the undergrowth becomes something sinister when you're the only person for miles. But as the night stretched on, the unease grew. The sounds of the forest, the ones that had been my constant background noise, began to shift. It wasn't that they stopped entirely, but they felt wrong. The usual chirping of insects and distant hoots of owls faded, replaced by an eerie silence. And then something new, footsteps. Not the kind of scurrying you hear from raccoons or deer, but slow, deliberate steps. Heavy enough to be human, but far too controlled. I sat up in my tent, heart pounding. My first thought was that it was another hiker. Maybe someone had gotten lost or decided to camp nearby. But something in my gut told me that wasn't the case. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent as quietly as I could, peering out into the darkness. My fire had died down to embers, barely casting any light, but I could make out the trees around me, their trunks like silent sentinels in the night. Nothing, no movement, no sign of another person, but the feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. If anything, it had gotten worse. I debated calling out, but something inside me screamed not to. Instead, I stayed still, listening, trying to pick up on any sound beyond my own breathing. Minutes passed, then an hour. Eventually, exhaustion won over fear, and I lay back down, though sleep was slow to come. Morning brought little relief. The forest looked the same, but I couldn't shake the lingering feeling of unease. I packed up quickly, deciding to push further along the trail. Maybe it had been nothing, just an overactive imagination, my mind playing tricks on me in the isolation. But I couldn't convince myself of that. I checked the ground around my campsite for footprints, but the soil was too firm, the leaves too scattered. If something had been there, it hadn't left any sign. I walked fast that day, barely stopping to rest. The miles blurred together, but no matter how far I went, the feeling stayed, like eyes boring into my back, like something was just out of sight but always there. Every so often, I'd turn suddenly, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was making me feel this way, but I never saw anything. By the time I made camp that night, I was exhausted. I had pushed myself harder than usual, my legs screaming with each step. I found a clearing near a fast-moving creek, hoping the sound of the water would drown out whatever paranoia had taken hold of me. But as the night fell, so did the silence. Again, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Again, the footsteps returned. I didn't move this time. I stayed in my sleeping bag, listening, barely breathing. The steps were closer now, just beyond the ring of trees at the edge of my camp. They stopped and started, as if whoever or whatever was out there was watching, waiting. My hand tightened around the knife I kept beside me, my only real weapon. The hours crawled by, but nothing happened. No attack, no voice calling out. Just the presence, the weight of unseen eyes, the knowing that I was not alone. By dawn, I had made a decision. I was cutting my trip short. I wasn't going to wait and see what happened if I stayed another night. I packed up faster than I ever had before and practically ran down the trail, ignoring the burning in my legs, the ache in my shoulders. Every so often, I'd hear something, a snap, a rustle, but I never saw anything. The miles between me and civilization felt endless. Then finally I saw it. The dirt road where I had parked my car, my escape from whatever had been lurking in the woods. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. As I threw my gear into the back seat and slammed the door, I turned to look back at the trail one last time, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing just beyond the tree line, tall, motionless, watching me, not moving closer, not hiding, just standing there, too far away for me to make out details, but close enough that I knew it had been there all along. I didn't wait to find out more. I got in the car, started the engine, and drove. Even now, I don't know who or what I encountered out there. I don't know if it had followed me for days or if it had only been watching me that last night. But I do know one thing: I'll never go back to that trail again. I had planned the trip for weeks. It was supposed to be a simple solo hiking trip. Just me, the trees, and the fresh mountain air. The trail wasn't particularly difficult, but it wasn't for beginners either. It was one of those lesser-known paths, not too far from civilization but still remote enough that I wouldn't run into too many people. That was part of the appeal. The drive up was smooth. I parked my car at the small gravel lot near the trailhead, shouldered my pack, and started walking. The first few miles were peaceful. The only sounds were my boots crunching the dirt, the rustling of leaves, and the occasional bird call. I felt good, alive, free. The trail wound through dense forest, thick with towering pines and patches of undergrowth. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. That's something I always noticed about hiking alone. The way the world seemed to fold in around me, cutting off the rest of civilization. At some point, even the birds stopped chirping. It was just me and my own breathing. I tried not to let it bother me. A few hours in, I noticed something odd. A fallen tree blocked the path, its roots sticking out like skeletal fingers. That wasn't the strange part. Trees fall all the time. What was strange was the way it had fallen. It wasn't natural. It looked like someone had deliberately dragged it across the trail. There were marks in the dirt, like something heavy had been dragged through it. But by what? A storm could have knocked it over, but there hadn't been one recently. I climbed over it and moved on, shaking off the uneasy feeling. About an hour later, I stopped for a break near a small stream. I took off my pack, splashed cold water on my face, and checked my map. I still had a few more miles to go before I reached the spot where I planned to set up camp. That's when I noticed something strange in the dirt near the water. Footprints. Not mine. They were fresh, leading from the forest's edge to the stream and back again. Barefoot. The sight sent a chill through me. Who walks through the forest barefoot? Maybe another hiker? But I hadn't seen anyone all day. And the more I looked at them, the more they bothered me. The way they were spaced, too close together, like whoever made them was walking strangely. I stood there for a while, listening, but the woods were silent. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe some camper had wandered through here earlier. I shook it off, shouldered my pack, and kept moving. The further I went, the more I started noticing things. Small things at first. Twigs snapped somewhere behind me, but when I turned around, there was nothing. A strange, musky smell hung in the air at times, disappearing as quickly as it came. A few times, I thought I saw something move out of the corner of my eye, just beyond the trees, but when I looked, there was nothing there. It was that feeling, that gut feeling, the one you get when you're being watched. Couldn't shake it. I'd been on enough hikes to know when my nerves were getting the best of me, but this wasn't that. This was different. By the time I reached the spot where I planned to camp, the sun was starting to set. I set up my tent quickly, collected firewood, and got a small fire going. I cooked a simple meal, ate in silence, and tried to relax. The fire was comforting, but beyond its glow, the forest was dark. Too dark. The kind of dark where your mind starts playing tricks on you. I sat there, listening to the fire crackle, trying to ignore the way the woods seemed to press in around me. I had planned to stay up for a while, maybe read a book, but something told me to turn in early, so I did. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay there for what felt like hours, listening to the forest. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke up to a sound, a low scraping noise, like something being dragged across the ground. I held my breath, listening. It was close, just outside my tent. I slowly reached for my flashlight and flicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on the fabric of my tent. I saw nothing, but the noise had stopped. My heart was pounding. I wanted to believe it was just an animal, but deep down I knew better. Then I heard it again, this time from the other side of the tent. I stayed completely still, listening. The sound was slow, deliberate. Something was circling my tent. I clenched my flashlight, ready to shine it outside, but something stopped me. Some primal instinct screamed at me to stay quiet. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Then, just like that, the sound was gone. I lay there for what felt like hours, waiting. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off. Morning came, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. That musky, rotten smell. It was stronger now, clinging to everything. I unzipped my tent and stepped outside. The first thing I saw were the footprints, those same barefoot prints circling my tent. My stomach dropped. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the woods, but there was nothing. No sign of anyone, just those prints in the dirt. I broke camp in record time. My hands were shaking as I packed up my gear, shoving everything into my bag without bothering to fold it properly. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I just wanted to get out. The hike back felt different. The woods weren't peaceful anymore. Every shadow felt like it was hiding something. Every sound made me jump. The whole way, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following me, but I never did. By the time I reached my car, I was drenched in sweat, despite the cool morning air. I threw my pack into the back seat, got in, and locked the doors. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to slow my breathing. Then I started the engine and drove away, watching the trees disappear in my rearview mirror. I haven't been back to that trail since. I probably never will.